You're listening to The Lyndia Grant Show. Think on these things with Lyndia Grant.
Well, good evening, Radio 1 listeners. Thank you for tuning in to The Lyndia Grant Show. I'm always happy to be here with you on Fridays. Today is January the 20th. And I have one guest with me today. I'm so excited about that. I have the one and the only Ben Jealous. Ben Jealous is the author of Never Forget Our People Were Always Free. It is a parable of American healing and professor of practice. He's a professor of practice, University of Pennsylvania, and a former national president of the NAACP. Dr. Julian Malvo is unable to be with us today, so I'm always glad when I have guests like National President of Ben Jealous. I'm always glad to give him the extra time. Are you there, Dr. Jealous? How are you today?
I am. Oh, thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you for being here. I want you to go ahead and tell us a little bit about what's going on with your new book, and if you want to talk about politics first, that's up to you. But I know what we're here to do. We're here to talk about your new book. And I love the title, Never Forget Our People Were Always Free. And I want you to tell me how that title came about.
You know, that title was something that my grandma used to say that didn't make any sense because 3 of her grandparents were born into slavery. And she was 103 years old when I started writing the book. She would pass at 105 just after I finished. And what I figured out along the way was that thing she said that didn't make any sense when she said it, never forget our people were always free, was something that had been said by the first woman on her maternal line to be enslaved in the United States. And this was something that she used to say to her children and grandchildren that they repeated. When it was first said, it was actually a call to insurrection. It was a call to rebel against slavery.
Oh, okay. So you got that from your grandma. I love that. She must have been talking.
But here's the thing: you had to keep digging into the history, digging into the family, figuring out that she was repeating something that her mother said, and then her mother was repeating something that her mother and her mother said. That she had heard her mother, her grandmother, her great-grandmother all say the same thing, even though the great-grandmother had been born into slavery, for instance.
Okay.
The grandmother had been born into slavery. They would say, never forget our people were always free. But this was echoing down the line, and so we went back and back and back on that maternal line, and it turns out that that maternal line started with a woman who had been a pirate in Madagascar and was captured into slavery, sold into slavery in the United States. And what else would a pirate woman say to her children and her grandchildren born into slavery, but never forget our people were always free?
Yes, indeed. I love that. Thank you. Now, that helps me to clear it up because I wasn't sure where your topic was. I knew it had to do something with the homeland. Tell us about this exciting new book, and you just kicked it off.
Yeah, I just Lyndia, I just cut it off. I just kicked off this book tour last week. We published it on the 10th of January, so I guess it's been out for about 10 days. The purpose of the book is to really get into where the American notion of race came from, what its purpose was, what are the lies behind it, and why am I optimistic that we can move beyond it. And it took me really digging into the history of Virginia, where my family's from, digging into my DNA. The big lie that Dr. King was trying to teach us at the end of his life when he was organizing the Poor People's Campaign. And I think people forget Dr. King was assassinated organizing a campaign to pull poor people of all colors together to demand that they get paid fairly at work, to demand that their kids all had access to good schools. And when he was killed, what he was trying to teach us was that racism was designed to be a wedge, and that everybody who gets split by it, every group that gets split from each other gets weaker as a result. What Dr. King understood that we have tended to forget is that before there were slave rebellions, there were colonial rebellions. That before slaves were rebelling by themselves, they were rebelling alongside European indentured servants. Mm-hmm. And what happened in between was that the definition of race in America changed. It had been for 600 years in Europe a word that meant tribe or nation. All of a sudden, there was this pseudo-scientific notion that there were multiple human races, multiple races of humans. Complete lie, complete fabrication, but it succeeded where the military couldn't in splitting the two groups. Up until that point, up until the early 1700s, European indentured servants and African slaves kept rebelling side by side. But once this idea was introduced, that black folks, that our people, that Negroes, as we were called, were subhuman, and that whites were inherently superior, then the indentured servants turned their backs on the enslaved Africans, and they didn't want anything to do with them. So that's what Dr. King was trying to teach us: is that race and racism is a wedge to disempower working people, and that if we come together across racial lines, we will be much more powerful.
And Dr. Jealous, can I just tell you, and you tell me if I'm right? When I was at Trinity College in Washington getting my master's, I remember in one of my medieval history classes learning about the indentured servants and what that whole story meant. And I asked my teacher, is that what happened? The indentured servants, many of them, came to America, and because of how they had been treated, decided they wanted to do something too, similar. And she said yes. Had you heard that?
The history of indentured servitude, kind of rose up right along the history of slavery in the U.S. May actually predate it in some ways.
Yes,
but the two groups were treated very, very similarly when they got to the U.S. In the earliest days, in the 1600s, not the 1700s, not the 1800s, not something we saw in Roots. In the earliest days, 1620, 1630, 1640, both groups were ruthlessly exploited. Both groups had virtually no legal protection, and both groups intermarried. Both groups, that's why you see so many black folks with freckles. There were lots of Irish indentured servants. And we were both at the bottom of the economy. And both groups rebelled together against the king and the king's representatives in the United States, the colonial overlords. And they kept rebelling together. I mean, if you think about it, even the Boston Massacre, if you look at John Adams' defense of the Redcoats, who shot all those young American protesters that day, John Adams tries to basically excuse the police violence against the mob by saying that the mob is Negroes, mulattoes, and jack tars. Jack tars is a term for the poorest whites in the U.S. Navy, usually conscripted out of bars. And the other two are black folks. So that crowd in Boston, Paul Revere would literally paint them as being all white, and that was the mythology. But actually the group was a mixed race group, and that had been the tradition of American rebellions for some time. So, that's in my book, Never Forget Our People Were Always Free, really, telling stories about, family, telling stories about politics and my experiences, but all of that is just to set up a real exploration of who we are as an American people. On the journey, I figured out not only am I cousins to U.S. Vice President Dick Cheney, which surprised me. I mean, such a conservative, never expected to be cousins to him, but I'm also cousins to Robert E. Lee. As the former national president of the NAACP, figuring out that General Lee was your cousin kind of messes with your head for a minute. Trying to mess with your head for a minute.
Yes. Let's talk about it after we come back from our commercial break,
right.
Dr. Jealous. We're going to go to our commercial break, and when we come back, I want to talk some more about our guest, Dr. Ben Jealous, former NAACP president, just told us he was a cousin to Robert E. Lee. Would you all believe that? We're going to talk some more about that when we come back from our commercial break. Back in a moment.
If it wasn't for my care coach at AmeriHealth, I probably wouldn't be so healthy right now. As a man, we don't get checkups or see a doctor regularly anyways. It's probably just a man thing because none of my partners go either. We know we should, but we just don't, and hope it works out.
So what changed for you?
AmeriHealth assigned me a care coach, somebody that gives one-on-one help, answer questions, explain things, and help set my appointments. She also helped me understand what having high blood pressure really means and ways to manage it so it doesn't kill me. It ain't nothing to play with. If you're a member of AmeriHealth, ask for a care coach. I'm glad I got mine.
At AmeriHealth, if you need a care coach, you can have one. Just call us at 1-877-759-6224 to get connected. 1-877-759-6224. This program is funded in part by the government of the District of Columbia Department of Healthcare Finance. Mayor Muriel Bowser.
Washington and former religion columnist Lyndia Grant.
Who Moved My Cheese is a book about two types of people, those who accept change quickly and move on, and those who hem and haw and try to figure things out. They didn't see change coming and waste valuable time trying to figure out what happened. How did this happen to me? Let's call this group procrastinators. The lesson inside the cheese story is simple. Life is change. Gerther said it best when he said, "If I accept you as you are, I will make you worse. However, if I treat you as though you are what you're capable of becoming, I help you become that." We must change and keep moving. The Bible tells us to seek and you shall find, knock and the door will be open unto you, ask and it shall be given.
Read more in the religion column of the Washington Informer, an award-winning African-American newspaper. We don't report crime or gossip, just positive news. Pick up the Washington Informer or visit us online at washingtoninformer.com. Call 202-561-4100 for more information.
This is Frank Smith with the African American Civil War Museum in Washington, D.C., located at 1925 Vermont Avenue Northwest on the Green Line. Did you know that a recent study found that children who visit museums do better in school and in life than children who do not? So parents, teachers, and preachers, let's get moving. I promise you, if you bring your children to the African American Civil War Museum, they will be inspired by the images that they see. They will be impressed by our living history reenactors who are always available, and they will be involved in our scavenger hunt that takes them throughout our exhibit. That's the African American Civil War Museum, 1925 Vermont Avenue. Our hours are 10 to 6:30 on weekdays, 12 to 4 on Saturdays and Sundays. See it, be inspired.
You're listening to the Lyndia Grant Show here on Spirit 1340 WYCB. I just want to let everyone know we're talking to Dr. Ben Jealous. I don't know if I don't see Doctor on here, but I can't help but to call you Dr. Ben Jealous.
That's all right.
Author of
that's a long tradition.
Good. Author of Never Forget Our People Were Always Free. Go ahead and talk to us now a little bit more about you being a relative to Robert E. Lee.
Well, just to go back for a second to you calling me doctor, Dr. King was known, Julian Bond would say that Martin Luther King would always call everybody doctor. And then Dr. King's protege, Reverend Orange, when he was training me and Stacey Abrams, he used to call everybody leader. And that was his homage to Dr. King. So I'll take it. Yeah, my grandmother, I was able to find to find the will of the man who owned her grandfather and her great-grandfather and their families. They're the last owner on that side of the family. Yeah. And they walked out of freedom right on the day of the Battle of Appomattox. They were slaves to the last day in Virginia. My grandmother's grandfather, my grandmother's great grandfather, and in the master's will, there was only one enslaved person mentioned, and that was my grandmother's great-grandfather, whom the owner referred to as his manservant, Frederick. Well, based on our DNA, based on our based on a bunch of historical documents, including that will, what Henry Louis Gates Jr. at Harvard helped me figure out as I was writing Never Forget Our People Where I Was Free was that the owner knew that Frederick, his manservant, was his older brother by 6 years.
Okay.
And while he didn't have the courage to free him, he was apparently troubled by the idea that he might be cast deeper into the hell that was slavery. So he used that paragraph in his will, the only time he mentioned any of the enslaved people that he owned, to protect Fred every way he could think of, to make sure that his life would be stable even after he died. And it showed me that despite the cruelties and the contradictions of slavery, even slave owners understood that how to say this, that they were family with the slaves that shared their blood, their bloodline, the slaves that were their fathers or their grandfathers' other children, and that was significant to me. It didn't excuse anything, but it complexified things, and it made me understand that at the very least, this owner, who was a proud cousin of Robert E. Lee, that my grandmother's grandfather and her great-grandfather would have known that they too were cousins to General Lee, and that might have explained why my grandmother's grandfather, who was 17 when he walked out of slavery, had the hubris, had the arrogance, if you will, to believe he could lead a political party in Virginia. And by the time he was 35, he was leader of the Black Republicans in the state of Virginia and would lead them in a revolt that I go into in my book. But it just, we think of slavery, we think of race, we think of discrimination as building these big impenetrable walls in our society. It's actually more complex than that.
Yes, it is. I know. I'm telling you, yours is a story similar to some others that we heard. So tell us, I want to make sure that if you have any book signings in the area so people can go to one, or tell them where they can get the book. I want to make sure we get all that out before we run out of time.
Well, thank you, Lyndia, and thank you for having me on. Yes, so the book's called Never Forget Our People Are Always Free. My name is Ben Jealous. You can find it at your local Black-owned bookstore, woman-owned bookstore, community bookstore, or at Amazon.com. And I would love it if people would order it. I guarantee you'll enjoy it. Chapter 1 is me training Dave Chappelle how to shoot because he was afraid that a race war might break out on Y2K. It's a fun book.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. And who did you say was doing the teaching?
Oh, me. Dave Chappelle's my godbrother. It's a chapter 1. It's a true story about me training him how to shoot on the eve of Y2K because he was concerned there's a 1% chance that the conservative preachers in his community were right and that Armageddon might come the next day.
Okay. All right. I'm from a preacher family too, but believe it or not, there's so much stuff that goes on these days. It makes you wonder, well, do you need a gun in your house? I don't want to talk about that with all these churches listening, but it's a human way to feel.
It is a human way to feel, and he was a very reluctant gun owner, and I don't think ever used that gun again. But but it just shows just the level of fear that we that we often live with. And each chapter of the book is told as a parable. My Christian faith runs throughout it. I think folks will enjoy the read.
Can I ask you how you got the idea or why you got the idea? Did something inspire you to want to write this book?
Yeah, really my grandma. My grandma was the storyteller in the family, in the West African tradition. I guess you could call it the griot in the family. And I was the grandchild most attached to her apron strings. And I was afraid that in my busy life I wouldn't be able to convey the stories to my children. So I started writing them down. And then as I looked at it, I really realized that there was a book here for a wider audience. My grandmother was transformative figure in Maryland in the war on poverty. She was a soldier in the civil rights movement, and she raised me to be resiliently optimistic about our country, and so that comes through. But also, like I said, I was trying to figure out some mysteries. One of them was to figure out why was it significant that before there were slave rebellions, there were colonial rebellions. So I dug into that. I figured that out. And then another one was this family mystery. Why would my grandmother insist on repeating that our people were always free when she knew so many had been enslaved? And it really came down to that was a statement that had been used to inspire the first generations of our family born into slavery. It was essentially a battle cry back then. They passed it down as a way of inspiring resistance against slavery and Jim Crow and discrimination, even after people lost sight of what it meant in the first place.
Well, I just want to remind you, I don't know if Carol got a chance, and I thank Carol for helping confirm you today, that I'm from the All Nations Baptist Church family, Reverend Dr. James Coleman, who I think during the time you were president was our chapter's chaplain. And you came to our church, and I don't remember what it was, Men's Day or something, but I wanted to remind you of that.
Well, always, excuse me, I'm a little cold, always happy to come back. I'll be leading the Sierra Club soon. And we're active, Georgia, and always happy to come back. And please give your pastor my regards and tell him I appreciate him for hosting me that day.
All right. Well, I certainly will. I'm going to send him a copy of the show. I always get a copy. And I will also send you a copy, or Carol, and you all can use it if you need to. I thank you for being my guest today. And give me any closing comments you might want to give while we have about a minute or so to go.
Well, my hope is that people will read the book and it will inspire them to understand that race as we understand it, is something that was created in this country. It's something that we can undo, and that the sooner we reach across those lines of race to form strong movements to improve our country, the better off all of our children will be.
Okay. All right. Well, we've been talking. Thank you so much. Ben Jealous, Dr. Ben Jealous, author of Never Forget Our People Were Always Free, a parable told to him by his grandmother. And we all can relate to that because African Americans who descend from the continent of Africa were free people. And so it's good that even though we're still here in America, that we conduct our lives today still in a free manner. And this book is quite a reminder. And since he is a professor of practice at University of Pennsylvania, you all can take that book and use it as a textbook, I'm certain. And I thank you for being my guest today.
Thank you so much. Have a blessed day.
All right, you do the same. Thank you for tuning in to the Lyndia Grant Show. I want you to subscribe to my YouTube channel and never miss an episode. Pick up the Washington Informer newspaper. This week, I did an article about cell phones and how it impacts the lives of our children and youth and young adults. Pick up the Washington Informer. I've been writing for them for about 18 years, the Religion Corner. Next week, we'll have another exciting guest for you. I also invite you to come out to the All Nations Baptist Church located at number 2 Rhode Island Avenue, Northeast Washington, D.C., where our pastor is the Reverend Dr. James Coleman. Look for the church with the red doors right at the corner of North Capitol and Rhode Island Avenue. Earl Nightingale once said, "Words, thoughts, and deeds have a boomerang effect. So be careful what you send out. We do become what we think about. And Scripture says, my people perish for the lack of knowledge. So think on these things from the Lyndia Grant Show. I'm your host, Lyndia Grant. Until next week, good day."
listening to The Lyndia Grant Show. Think on these things with your host, Lyndia Grant.